Tales from the Polyverse, the Aurum throne. After it becomes apparent the health of the leader of Kumshtashkal is failing and would never recover, the membership of the quorum began to vie for position in the next reign. Many may fight to lead, in the end only one can live. Key terms and ideas. Phareses, the city, state, or township or area that is controlled by the phare. The phare is the lone male and de facto leader or figurehead of the Phareses. The quorum, the group of quora that report to and or manipulate the phare and handle the day-to-day operation of the Phareses. Quora, the women of the Pharisees, nominally 1/40th of the population. Maten, the balance of the population of the Pharisees. They are genderless, workers, drones, warriors, ether, that generally stay out of politics, but will lean more towards direct parentage. Transitory, a quora in the midst of turning into a phare, nominally 1/7th of the quorum during the vying for position phase. Pronouns include he, she, t, me, him, her, tir, mer, his, hers, ters, mers. A quatran is a quora in the midst of or near the end of a transition, but without the probability of gaining or having a Phareses. Generally is a derogatory term as the speaker considers the distinct possibility of failure. Phaten, fully transitioned phare without a Pharisees. Not always derogatory, some don't want to lead or have responsibilities. Phathanless, a derogatory term for a Pharisees-less phare, usually reserved for a later stage transitory who wished to build their own society rather than rest on their ancestors' laurels.
We all knew that it was due to happen any time. In fact, some amongst us considered it odd transitions hadn't already started. Tolmet IX, my eldest sibling and current phare of Kumstakal, was ailing. Our once proud leader was no longer able to fulfill the duties of his position. Unfortunately, he was soon to depart his body altogether. Sad as it was, this was a fact of life. Even for a phare, no one could live forever. None knew this more than the Maten, whose short lives were certainly a whirlwind of living. The shortest lived of all of us, they had to cram a lot into a short time. As for a phare whose long lives witnessed the departures of more than a few generations, it was certainly a lonely life. Each Pharisees had their own traditions. Some peoples even chose to live outside the constraints of civilization, and even provided the trade that was vital for us all. For us in Kumstakal, our phare sat on the Aurum throne. When one departed, a new phare should be ready to take their seat. It was common knowledge that none could force a transition, and once started, it could also not be stopped. There were many horror stories of quora that tried both and died very painfully. So, with no sign of any transition beginning within the quorum, we assumed that there was time. Some wanted to transition, some didn't, but desire was irrelevant. Whomever fate chose had to be ready, or the Pharisees would perish. We had all been on constant vigil since Tolmet had taken ill. We were all hoping to get ahead of any packs before any could sneak up upon us. During normal days, backstabbing and courtly maneuvers were common, as natural as our 3 sons. However, transitory periods brought out the worst in all quora. The longer a transitory period was, the bloodier it could get, and the more the Maten would suffer. We had to keep them content and working, not afraid of tomorrow, or as proven in the past, the Pharisees would be doomed. In my own youth, I had fantasized about becoming phare. I guess most of us did at some point. I wanted to change the world with science and technology. I wanted to light the light of reason as a beacon to the future. But now I was old, the longest lived of the quora I knew of. I knew I was set in my ways, and transitioning forced habits to change. Not to mention, a radical transformation of a living body was, at times, hazardous. Transitioning was also not for the too young, as they had no idea how things go normally and could drive civilization to dust. Only those in midlife were just wise enough and useful enough to drive a thriving civilization. This morning I had unusual vigor. Something was happening, and it would happen soon. I went over the possibilities of who could be friend or foe in the coming days, as I did most mornings. As I readied for the morning's events, I ignored my own body. Why fret over the impossible? I considered the strengths and weaknesses of those I thought most likely to transition, who to support and who to force to fail. Who I would support would have a great influence on the future. I was full-lived and had clutched many of the eggs of the population. My input was invaluable.
"My quora,"
started my aide, one from my first clutches.
"Might I compliment you on your spirit? You are quite a light. Did you sleep well?"
Maten had no drive, but they did have an eye for changes. Being short-lived, they kind of had to. Kaltan's remarks forced me to look over my own form. The changes were small and distinct. There was no denying that I had started the transition. I hoped I was too old for this. And so it begins, I sighed.
"What are you suggesting?"
Kaltan started before me realized.
"Milady, are you—"
Yes, Kal. I just barely kept from grumbling. I am officially in the running to take over the Aurum throne.
"I don't understand. Is that not a great honor?"
Kaltan grimaced.
"Yours will be the genes of the future."
If I survive. Transitioning is for the much younger, the ones that can adapt quicker.
"But you have the greatest advantage,"
Kaltan assured.
"You know the whole of the Pharisees and all within. You are well versed in quorum law, and your genes are already a majority."
And the quorum also know me, and some are not bogged down by habit. But your confidence is comforting, I assured Mer. I'll be heading out early. See to it that you and the rest are at the festival's opening. The festival opening was to be held at the great field of the Three Lights, named in our earliest days when we worshipped our three suns as gods. While theism still had a hold, we were moving in the right direction at least. Some Pharisees still had the three gods, amongst others. The field was well worn but maintained, and was large enough that our entire population could fit in neat files if we wished. The grand field was set up in the middle of a triangle made up of the ziggurats of Re, representing our largest of stars, Ra, representing the next largest, a yellow star, and Aurum, the smallest red star. Naturally, the ziggurat of Re was the grandest of the pyramids, and was the center of attention. As I entered the field from one of the service entrances, I was greeted by some of the Matan workers, making certain everything would run smoothly, despite the cloud of uncertainty over the state of Tolmets.
"A little early for the festivities, aren't you, Helena?"
mocked Bastet, one of my frenemies in the quorum. She was not one of my siblings, or even in my lineage. She was one of the rogue outsiders Tolmet had accepted into our family. A few years ago she had earned her place in the quorum, and had made great strides in proving herself, and of course improving the Pharisees as she went. Like many rogues come citizens, she was a bit older than the median age of Quora, yet she was still youthful enough. Like me, she had piercing blue eyes, but that was where the similarities ended. Her jet-black fur was quite at odds with my own off-white with graying black spots. Though she was half a head shorter than I, she maintained she was tall for her home Pharisees. While we were both scientists, my specialty was in chemistry and materials sciences, and she was an agricultural and animal sciences major. At my age, I shrugged cagily, one has to allow extra time to get from point A to point B. Never know when one has to take a break. She looked me over, scented the air. She realized what was happening.
"Yeah, transitioning must be so hard."
She was one that would accept a change if it helped her, but wasn't going to seek it. She felt anything could be used by those who were smart enough to take the initiative. I liked that about her, but at times like-minded people experienced friction between themselves. Well, when it's all over, I'll show you how hard it can be, I shrugged.
"Tempting as it may be," she scoffed, "one has to survive the transition first, and the elderly seldom do."
Light slowly crept up the ziggurat. It was only minutes until Ray climbed above the horizon. Leisurely at first, then with increasing frequency, quantity, and vigor, more of the Quora and Matan arrived to take their place. I observed carefully as the infield filled. I had to plan my path to victory. First I saw Nema. She was the youngest of us. She was a creamy yellow lioness who had barely begun her adulthood. I was surprised she hadn't clutched yet. Her form was thicker than I remembered, her fur more fluffed. Could it be? Yes, she was transitioning. What was going on? Then there was Scent, another outsider. She had worked extremely hard over her long tenure in the Aurum. Her fur was roset, or yellow sunish, colored with obsidian black stripes. She always stood out. Though I had considered her a prime candidate for transitioning, her regal bearing was unchanged. Then Yelana took her place. Her medium brown leopard print fur was immaculate. Had she been transitioning, and I wasn't, she would have been my first choice. Despite her weak grasp on mechanical design, she could learn, and I would have been more than happy to teach her. Then I saw Teneme. I've always hated her. She was the current head of the priestesses, and the first of the Aurum, though I didn't know how she managed it. She presided over most of the ceremonies of Kamashtkal. She took her place on the pedestal midway up the pyramid of Hre, and looked out over the people with fairly well-hid disdain. Her yellow-brown and spotted fur was, as always, well-tended. She always had to look her best. But there was something, more than one thing really, that was different. She was a transitory as well, though a bit further along than I was. Finally, a legitimate reason to plan her downfall. Soon Nimue made her entrance. She was spry and energetic. Though she was born amongst the Pharisees, we all suspected she was not of Tolmet, though thankfully not transitory. Despite her questionable lineage, we had accepted her as a true sister. Her rust-red fur made her look more like a fox than the rest of us. At about this time, too many began to arrive to adequately check them out. 20 Quora in all, and the Marten that outnumbered us 3-1.
Ladies of the Aurum, Marten, and Kamashtal, Teneme began her speech as Ray dramatically appeared over their ziggurat. Timing was all important to her. Welcome. We gather this morning, marking the return of autumn to our skies, to celebrate the unprecedented era of peace our Faure has presided over. As the first of sisters, she was our de facto leader when Tolmet was not around. Even though Tolmet was a Faure driven by reason, and Teneme was most definitely not. Despite this not being a Pharisees driven by theism, she would loudly admonish derision of her claims of signs everywhere. She always had to insert her ideas of faith whenever and wherever she could, to prove her power and such. This is more than a day of first, she continued. I didn't like where this was heading. This is also an end of an era. As of midnight, our Faure, the Magnus, Tolmet the Ninth, has joined the ancestors in the heavens. This revelation rocked the foundation of the Pharisees, and turned the mood to ice. As transitions had only just begun, we were effectively without a leader. Normally, transitions would start soon enough that they were near completed when a Faure joined the ancestors. At that point, it would be a quick round of skirmishes and assassinations before a new era began and calm return. Even though we had a first, her views were not compatible to all. This would be a long and potentially bloody transition. The Aurum looked at each other, and murmurs began as Teneme attempted to push her agenda. Though this has taken us by surprise, Hrates will provide us with direction. I suppose that's my cue, called a voice from the back, somehow loud enough for the whole field to hear. It must be Providence. This Pharisees needs a Faure, and one arrives. One that will lead this paltry troop into the future. While keeping an eye on Teneme, we all moved to take in the newcomer. An odd combination of dark patterns of stripes and spots, this calico transitory was a bit overly confident, and with good reason. T had a following, and was further along than the rest in the field, but it was still distinctly a Quora. The confidence in T's voice was troubling. There was something I didn't like about this interloper. Even if the words had been from a true Faure, not a Quaten, it took more than a body and misplaced confidence to be a leader. This random newbie would have to work hard to gain support, and I would fight tooth and claw to prevent this thing
from ruining my siblings' great work. What surprised me most, however, was that the Quaten was flanked by Quora that were obviously over-enamored by it. The Quora T gathered were diverse, none from the same Pharisees by the looks of them. Clearly this was a rogue group that had gotten tired of being rogues. They wanted to be civilized but did not want to work for it. They simply wanted to take from others without really earning it for their own. This would not be as easy for them as they hoped.
You are not welcome here, Quaten.
Teneme voiced one of the few sentiments of hers I agreed with. The Quaten sneered.
How dare you talk to your rightful foray like that, you horrid Quata! I am Sekhmet III, and I will lead this lesser horde of pathetic Pharisees into the future, with or without you, by force if I have to.
Such pitiful arrogance! I mean, taking a Pharaoh's name long before even the glimmer of a Pharisees was in their sight? What did that group of Quara see in here?
You are no Pharaoh,
I sighed as muted conversation amongst others erupted. Build a Pharisees on your own. Or can't you handle real work? Many voiced agreement with my sentiment. Even Teneme nodded hers as I continued. Even if you were fought then, especially if, you would know it would take more than just having a good body, which, by the way, you don't. To be a Pharaoh, you have to have that je ne sais quoi. Leave. Found your own Pharisees. And if you prove your worth, we may provide assistance. Resist, and you will retain nothing.
Sekhmet was taken aback.
How could T not expect resistance? Was T an idiot?
So,
The Quaten sneered, trying to appear superior, singling me out, as if I could be manipulated like two youthful ninnies.
you challenge my right to rule. Don't make me punish Kamakstal for your stupidity.
Sekhmet then smiled. It was an oily, deeply disturbing smile. It was obvious Sekhmet was not as stupid as I had originally assessed. T had an ace up her sleeve.
There is nothing to challenge.
My voice was more confident than I was. You are out of your league. Return to the kiddie pool where you belong. Under Teneme's unusually long reign, our Pharisees, Kamakstal, named for the 5 natural formations we possessed, ocean, mountain, forest, river, and plains, had experienced an era of peace even our most optimistic Eddas couldn't match. We had sadly been afforded the opportunity to ignore our neighbors and even rogues that surrounded us. We had forgotten what it was to be in a real struggle. We had grown soft, too soft perhaps. I think I found my mission, once I succeeded in taking over. I had to fix my siblings' mistakes.
Well then,
Sekhmet attempted to sneer derisively, but failed miserably.
I guess I will have to prove my power and punish you for your lack of faith.
At that, Term minions produced weapons and stormed the field. I wanted to know how Sekhmet convinced so many to follow, but right now I had to survive. This attack was bold, unexpected. Our citizens closest to the interlopers fell to their ferocity, but the rest of us recovered quickly. While some sisters used this opportunity to settle old grievances, most of us fought the true enemies. We had not brought weapons, so it was mostly a defensive at first. But once our Marten guards returned and tossed us some weapons, the tide began to turn. Sekhmet and Term minions considered me a threat and an easy target to make a statement. Little did they know that, despite my age, I was one of the better fighters. After all, I had plenty of time to practice. With the added oomph of my initial transitory state, I was more capable than usual. Though they had tipped their hands by triple-teaming me, I held my own quite well. As it became apparent we weren't the pushovers our peaceful ways suggested, Sekhmet realized her plans had to change. T suddenly withdrew to the edge of the grand field, while my other 2 opponents redoubled their efforts. T produced some bags and pulled out some clay spheres with ropes attached. I knew this was a bad thing, but still being outnumbered, I could do nothing but halfway watch as T lit the ropes.
Fall back!
Sekhmet called as T threw the spheres amongst our ranks. The rogues immediately obeyed and left the rest of us stymied, wondering what was going on. Moments later, the spheres exploded and the rogues disappeared in the smoke and shrapnel. As strained as the quorum was, even on our best days, We always strove to keep the general population from the ravages of politics. We knew that, while some Maten could be trusted to keep up, most just weren't cut out for courtly intrigue. One thing all Quorra agreed on was that it was just better to keep them out of the club. That being said, they were all smart and some paid enough attention, especially after the event in the Grand Field. They all knew something was going down. Some may even want to try to help or even play the game. My office was organized chaos. This was normal, but after the fight it was crazier than usual. I was consumed with not just staying alive, but with getting things ready for my mission after I succeeded. Kamashtal needed, a force that I could lead to victory.
"Milady!"
Kaltan gasped as Me entered with the lunch I had forgotten. Me was too good for me.
"What happened? Should I have Nimue come and tend to your wounds?"
She is apparently in support of Sekhme. I don't know how T has turst tentacles in the quorum so quickly. Nimue can't be trusted. Have our people avoid hers as much as possible. I returned absently as I organized dossiers.
"This is not the first that the Maten have heard of this Sekhme."
Kaltan put down the tray as I turned to him confused.
"Yes, my lady. T has been in communication with Kamakshtal for a while. We didn't think anything of it, until the incident, that is."
Kaltan began to tend my wounds herself. Kaltan was approaching mer end of life, like mer mother, me. They simply didn't live as long as us. That is why we tried to keep them from worry. Their lives were just too short.
"Rest assured, none of your children have listened to Sekhme, even as some others have wavered. We are all on your side, until our deaths."
May smiled as May cleaned my wounds.
"As you know, politics is no place for Maten, so we trust you, implicitly."
Call, you're too good for me, I sighed. But I do know that you like to observe, just like your mother. You know things.
"And you deserve to know what I know."
Kaltan smiled as Me bandaged my wounds.
"We know of those that came with the clay spheres. It's a new technology from across the sea. We never say anything because—"
You don't say anything because you don't know what we know. And some of the Quorra hate to be told things by their children. I looked at Mer. Do you really think of me that way?
"No, we thought you knew. Because you never asked, we assumed you had plans. But there it is. Everything seems to be wrong."
Yes, long-lived people tend to get complacent. Complacency kills should be more than just a saying. I need to take a more active role in your lives, so we don't get blindsided again. I sighed. I'm too old for this. I will need allies. Do your networks include that of Bastes?
"We talk, as do all Malten. Tell me what you need, and we will do our best."
Try to get a disposition of her, but don't take any chances. I need you.
"I have already lived longer than my time, but until my death, I am yours."
Get a team to the Grand Field, and let's get started on learning all we can about the Thunder Spheres.
"Already done. Initial analysis will be forthcoming within the hour."
You're too good for me.
"I am as good as I need to be."
Kaltan smiled.
"Though my life is reaching its finale, you have just received an encore. You are my mother, and I will see to it you have the best start of your new life before I depart. Yours will be the genes of the Pharises. Of that I am more certain than anything else in my life."
Thank you. We will make Kamashtal a beacon of all that is grand, but I have to figure out how to influence the ilk of Teneme.
"You may get your chance. We just need to get a private meeting secured. She knows she can't do it on her own. Convince her to follow you. Her faith can be useful."
There can be only one.
"You will be clever enough, I am certain."
The chapel of Rosset was dark. Seldom was it occupied at this time of night. I personally had not been here in years. The symbolism and stuffiness was just as oppressive as I remembered and feared. A little late, aren't we, dear oldest sibling? Teneme's disembodied voice almost laughed. One as set in her ways shouldn't seek to learn new tactics. I need answers, I returned, angry that I needed her help. And what makes you think I will provide any? She appeared behind the pulpit. You don't want to see Sekhme take our Pharisee and destroy Tomet's legacy. Answers are costly, she smirked. How is it you, Sekhme for that matter, have so much influence? I almost screamed. You control less of the population than any of us. It's the power of faith, Helena. With it, even a few can move mountains, she scoffed. Your lack of any kind of faith, or inability to instill it in others, is the problem.
That is why, despite your many, yes, I will admit it, great qualities, Tolmet preferred me to you. Despite your insane head start, with the fact that without me, you would be his natural choice. Faith is about psychology, knowing how to influence without bending. Faith is the reason a minority can push aside a majority. Faith, dear sibling, is why Sekhme has followers, even amongst our own Aurum. Faith is why you won't be able to win this, even with the disproportionate amount of genes you have already provided. Face it, Helena, you may be smart, sassy, and powerful, but you will fail, and fail miserably. Funny, I was about to say that to you, I sneered angrily, somehow knowing she was right. She laughed out loud, way too amused by my limits. You are smart, exceptionally so. Believe me when I tell you, in many ways, your intellect far exceeds mine, except in the ways that matter, in the game of power. You don't know how to use hearts and minds effectively. Do you truly think I believe all that I tell them, Haten? Ha, so you admit that you lie. I knew it. But hearing you admit it— Not lies, she interrupted, exasperated that I wasn't getting it. This is the final proof that you simply cannot win. You are always telling your children about thinking outside the box. You have to do it yourself. I don't have the time to explain it to you. She sighed heavily before continuing. Let's face it, I hate you, and you me. But this is a threat even I will have trouble with. We don't have to be enemies. We can't be friends. Yes, she groaned. Even she had to acknowledge some things were beyond her capabilities. Only one Phare can remain in Pharisees, one true leader, or no one really leads. We stared at each other for a moment, both stuck but not willing to admit it. This was a challenge neither could face alone. You help me, and I will ensure you have enough to start your own subservient Pharisees, Tiname offered. How about I take Kamashtal and you leave, I suggested. There was no way either could be subservient to the other. After all, I still remember your hatching. Though I was not mature, I should have ended you then. Yes, Tolmet often talked of it, though he was only Tathat at the time. I guess Tathat always did have too much faith and not enough suspicion. As stated, faith can move mountains. And stagnate swamps, I returned more angrily than I wanted. Tradition gets in the way of progress. Not always, but often, yes, she shrugged. And because I was smart enough to figure out how to use it to my advantage, you have resented me for it. I had to learn, because you were just too entrenched. Don't hate the player. You are right. We should work together, but we can no longer accept stagnation. There can only be one Phare, she sighed, knowing the futility of us working together. It appears one has to die. Both of us are too strong-willed to manipulate the other on such a short time scale. I had hoped to have more time, or wait you out before Tolmet departed. For the benefit of our beloved Pharisees, this has to end. As soon as possible, I'm afraid. Teneme accepted with a sigh. Neither wanted this today, but I was not as fast as her. She was far younger and a bit further along the transition than I. But I knew history, and I had been studying her, literally her entire life. I anticipated her attacks more than I incensed them. I could see no path forward. This would also be a race to tire the other out. I was forced to give up ground again and again to stay in the game. She also had another advantage, the home field advantage. She worked here day in and day out, while I avoided the place like a plague as much as I could, purely on principle. She was rope-a-doping me, seeking to tire her elder out. I had taught her to do this. My mistake. But at the time I would normally have been exhausted. I suddenly received a second wind. My sudden flurry of kicks and claw swipes caught my adversary completely off guard. I drove her back to the lectern quickly, knowing this wouldn't last. At the very last moment she recovered a bit, but it was too late. I knocked her hard into the statue depicting the founder of our Pharisees, Kelly the First. This sudden hard impact collapsed the statue, covering her in debris. She was not dead. If this wasn't a fight, she could have recovered, but we both knew this was her end. "Make it worth it!" she demanded when I hesitated. "Do it, bit!" I ripped out her throat, her blood spraying all over as guards finally arrived. Not quite according to plan, but it will have to do, I guess, I sighed. The guards did not attempt to stop my departure. This was not a crime. This was politics.
The pyres of my siblings Tomet, Teneme, and the few others that had passed recently waited to be lit on the temple platform of Aurum. I personally had no use for this sordid tradition, but Teneme's words about faith rang in my head. I had to gain strength, and this was one of the more efficient ways to do it. While I had been outspoken against the paltriness of useless tradition, I knew this would help to capture hearts, if not minds. As it was, with Sekhme's harassment, few others would be brave enough to preside over the laying to rest. I was finally able to use Teneme's ways to my advantage. I ascended the steps of Autumn's pyramid, slowly and reverently, as twilight crept across the land. With a deep breath I stepped to the lectern between the principal pyres and looked over the gathered crowd. It was far more than I expected. It was true. In times of uncertainty, even the normally faithless looked to tradition to get through it. I had much to learn about power.
People of Kamakshtal, I stand before you, the last of the principal line, to commit our beloved Fahre and the first, and the rest that have moved on to the ancestors. Those that came to these things were always reverent. Even if one didn't believe, it was safer and somewhat comforting to be amongst people that had faith. The silence was almost overpowering as I paused in my prepared remarks. I had sent one of the faithful help with the wording. She had many skills I knew I could tap later on, while there was many that knew I normally had no truck with ceremony. They wanted to believe that I believed. Sent assured me that this would help. Even if they wouldn't accept my change of view, I wouldn't have cared. This was working. I liked the feeling of power, of control. I finally understood how Teneme wormed her way to the top.
Our lives are change. Each must make their way in this dynamic world, and in turn make way for the next in line. This was almost more than I could stomach. I was glad I had practiced in front of the mirror. It is of great importance that we remember. What matters is the net gain to our family, to our Pharisees, to the world. We must thank those that have fully aided our lives. We must also forgive any for any deficit that they may have been accountable for.
Does that include you?
Sekhme's voice hijacked the speakers.
Has your beloved Helena, Minister of Science, informed you that she had killed the first?
I had, but as Sent informed me, emotions swayed like flames, and were far more dangerous. While we all knew on an intellectual level that death was natural, and even in dark times there was light, there was the fact that emotions were tricky to deal with. On that level, a skilled wordsmith like Teneme, as Sekhme it appears, could turn hurt feelings into weapons against those that even indirectly caused them, even when there was no other choice but to cause short-term pain for the long-term gain. A price must always be made. I started to hate the theistic approach. How was I to get a scapegoat now, and have them accept it? I knew I had to start lighting the pyres.
You are not worthy to light the pyres,
called Nimue, that little.
And I suppose abandoning your sisters and Martin makes you somehow worthy?
Baste returned. She would make a perfect first.
It takes strength to follow true strength, especially in the face of...
Sekhme tried to hijack the crowd again. But I had a plan. I knew what happened to Toshe, a priestess come transitory of Eldbray, far beyond the ocean. Marten were apparently great spies. No one paid attention to them, it seemed. I could use that. I would use that. Is it bravery that got you dismissed from service when Tothis IV offered aid to you to found a new Pharisees? Was it bravery that drove you to run before the blade of truth when you betrayed your benefactor rather than embrace the ancestors?
That was not Sekhme!
T called angrily. I had struck a nerve. Good.
I have bravery and strength in droves.
T appeared beside me with a blade to my throat. So much for bravery. I do not know how it worked across the ocean, but threatening death during a ceremony of passing here was no way to win the hearts of this Pharisees. While I was well within my rights to end Sekhme, and many amongst the gathered would be happy had I done so, 3/5 of the citizens would not. For me, the new de facto leader, to bloody my hands during this laying to rest was to invite catastrophe for my cause. If I was to win, I had to let someone else end her. At least if I died, Nima would emerge the leader. I had already set into motion plans to help her should that occur. Sent and Bast agreed that if the choice was Nima or Toshe,
Nima would live.
"You're not welcome, Kwatan!"
Yolana sighed, called, freeing my people from tipping her hand. Enjoy this respite while you can, Sekhmet sneered, with barely constrained rage. You may be long-lived, but this won't be.
She was right about that. Everything had just fallen into place for me. Well, with that settled, let us commend our beloveds to the beyond. I lit torches and passed some to Yolana, Neme, Bast, and Sint. We set to work lighting the pyres. Tolmet's was last, as was fitting. Ancestors, accept our beloveds, embrace their strengths, forgive their weaknesses, and prepare for our own arrival, I intoned, and the rest of the grand field echoed the sentiment. The grand field had been converted into an arena. We had to smooth over the disruptions caused by Tolmet's untimely departure soon before order collapsed. It had taken some doing, but I managed to get the final 3 transitories to agree to a trial of nightfall, one tradition shared by all known Pharisees. In this trial, the true leader would rise. The blood of the unworthy would wash away the sins of the prior season. The huge circular stage had been set up in the center of the field. The circle, known as a circle of equals, had 3 equidistant points, representing the 3 genders. Though it was only recently that I accepted the power of presentation, I had the honor of standing in the Rakshan point, representing the Phare. I maneuvered Nima into the position of Raten, representing the Quara's position of authority, and that left the point of Aktun, while ideally equal to the rest, was undesirable to one seeking to rule. We all knew which 2 of us mattered the most in this competition, though. Both Sekhmet and I basically ignored my sibling, focused solely on the biggest threat each faced. As the last sliver of Aurum, this season in the last light, slipped below the horizon, a tone sounded. The black match had begun. In a normal competition, all 3 competitors would meet in the middle after a solemn march. Both Sekhmet and I rushed along the border of the triangle that intersected the circle. This was not for entertainment, as it would be in other matches. This had to end quickly. Sekhmet was nearing the end of the transition, which afforded greater than normal strength. At least I still had greater speed, I hoped. Sekhmet, to play to his strengths, used a great bastard sword, swinging it quicker than one would expect and with greater precision than most could manage. I, however, had to play to my strengths and keep distance, so used a long spear or poleaxe. Poor young Nima, though, with little practical weapons experience, used twin wakizashi. Not that she was in the fight much. As we fought, the ferocity of our attacks took chunks out of the ground, wood, and even stone. Sparks sprayed with every meeting of the blades. Even if we weren't taking hits, the ferocity and speed of the fight meant that it wouldn't last too much longer. I was fatiguing faster than Sekhmet. I had underestimated my enemy. My years of experience was no match for the vigor of youth. My weapons shattered, I tripped and fell, injuring myself in the process. I had no chance against the speed of the oncoming death. I was too injured to regain initiative. Even had I the time to cower or try to crawl away, I wouldn't have given him the satisfaction. I needn't have feared, though, as Sekhmet drew back for the killing blow that would have bifurcated me. A blade appeared in his neck. Rather than keel over, Sekhmet turned to Nima, face distorted in anger. You missed the aorta, and I still have healing factor of the transition. Nima admirably stood her ground. I am not worthy of succeeding Tolmet, even should I be old enough. I just had to distract you. As Sekhmet realized what was happening, I plunged my backup blade that I had hidden in my boot into his temple. Nima stood for a moment as death caught up to Sekhmet. As Sekhmet crumpled to the ground, Nima fell to her knees and accepted her fate. All hail the next Phare! Had T known which name I would take, T would have used it, but I wanted to hold to tradition for those that believe. I hadn't revealed my Phare name to anyone. Ra and Maten of Kamakstal, I called out. This is the dawn of our greatest age. Too long have we rested on the laurels of Tolmet's peace. While we slept, our borders were breached by darkness. We can't let that happen again. We must secure our place in this world. To cast any darkness on Tolmet's legacy too soon was dangerous. Too late, and it would be just as bad. I had to take this chance. As the victor of the trial and the now undisputed Faure, this was the only chance I would have to establish the foundations of my reign. After all, his was one death in this affair that I couldn't be blamed for. Only time and the ancestors could be blamed. It was they who chose in the end who would rule. Tolmet's peace was good for its time, but with his departure, that has ended, I continued. Hathay's expansion has begun. The people cheered. I had won the gambit. Nima, still fearing but accepting of Turt death, fought to maintain composure. I looked down at her and smiled. The expansion begins this night, with a new Pharises, to be founded and led by my worthy sibling, whom we will all support as best we are able. Nima shuddered as T realized what I was offering her. It was a way out, without departure. T accepted my offered paw of assistance. I, Hepshe II, Faure of soon-to-exist Bongersrai, welcome your support. All hail Hathay the Eighth! All hail Hathay the Eighth! The crowd echoed. All hail Hathay the Eighth! All hail Hepshe II!